Hello and welcome to Popular Antiquarian, the podcast about a middle-aged man exploring the strange and forgotten corners of pop culture. That middle-aged man is me, Hieronymus J. Doom, and this is another episode in our deep dive into Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog, the Power Rangers adjacent action fantasy show set in pretend Ireland. We are looking at episode 6 this time out, The Wolf in the Rocks. So far, 3 of the Mystic Knights, Rohan, Deirdre and Ivar, have managed to get their magical armour, which means that only Angus is left. What will Maeve's cunning plan be to stop this from happening? If you guessed it would involve summoning some kind of badly animated monster, then you must be psychic, because that's exactly what is going to happen. But of course, I'm getting ahead of myself. One of the things I found fascinating about this show is the inconsistency of it all. It's at once deeply formulaic and all over the place. The tone varies wildly, even while the core plot points arrive with mechanistic precision. Often this leads to moments of sublime oddness, such as King Finvara of Tir na Nog ranting about the size of potatoes to an admiring crowd of elves. However, for every pleasant surprise there's equally likely to be a landmine. When I came into episode 6, I had a strong sense of what to expect, and I was very much looking forward to an episode focusing on Angus, who has emerged as my favourite character in the early portions of this series. He's quite down at heel, which always evokes some sympathy from me, and his status as the human punching bag of the show is something I also find appealing. He did not start particularly auspiciously, vibing as a barely controlled sociopath in the first episode before finding his feet as a more amiable version of himself, whose unearned confidence is balanced by a sense of pathos. This episode is going to do a sterling job of undermining all of that character development. But again, I am getting ahead of myself. We open on a battle scene as the druid Cahad narrates the premise of the show over the top, explaining that the forces of Temra are attacking the kingdom of Kells from every direction. And the battle feels a tad more visceral than we've seen so far. There's a guy with a huge mallet really going for it, and we actually see some people fall over, which is so far something of a rarity. I wonder if this represents the extras getting a bit more confident with the pretend fighting as they do more and more of it. The voiceover lists the Mystic Knights and finishes by describing Angus as a petty thief for the first but not the last time this episode. We then cut to Cahad's chamber and Angus swaggering in to tell the world that Angus is his name and fighting is his game. This is something of an odd thing to say, given that the only other people present in the room are Rowan, Deirdre, Ivar and Cahad the Druid, all of whom know exactly who he is and indeed what his job is. If I walked into a room at home and announced my name and occupation, my family would probably assume it was time to get my brain meds adjusted. Why not try that with your loved ones and see how they react? Angus follows this announcement by climbing up onto the table, which feels like further evidence that he's having some kind of episode. He declares he's going to destroy the Rockwolf of Temra and claim his armour. Rowan cautious Angus by saying that he speaks too boldly in Cahad's chamber, and Deirdre adds that when humility has fled, wisdom cannot call home. The dialogue in this scene is incredible, in that it lacks all credibility. Angus is talking like a jock from a 1960s US TV sitcom, while the others spout clunky chunks of cod Shakespearean aphorism like they're auditioning for a Game of Thrones spin-off set in a nursing home for the terminally confused. Angus declares that he's the best of the best and starts spinning his ball and chain around his head. This succeeds in breaking one of the druid's candlesticks, which, understandably, makes Cahad quite angry. Angus apologises with all the sincerity of a Tory MP who's been caught stamping on a badger. Cahad not unreasonably asks what the hell he's doing in the chamber, and Angus explains that he wants some of Cahad's magic to ensure victory against the Rockwolf of Temra. Actor Vincent Walsh delivers these lines with a strong undercurrent of menace, which only adds to the impression that in this episode Angus is actually a dangerous psychopath again. Cahad tells him that the magic to defeat the Rockwolf must be found within him. He accuses Angus of being afraid, because within him beats the heart of a petty thief, and Angus responds by trying to smash Cahad's head in with his ball and chain. This, it has to be said, is a bold characterisation choice for someone who is supposed to be one of the main heroes of the show. It's like having Scrappy-Doo pull a knife on Velma. Cahad responds to this attempt to literally murder him by using magic to make him shrink down to the size of an elf. Angus demands that Cahad turn him back to normal, and Cahad says that first he needs to apologise for his rude and arrogant behaviour, which is a roundabout way of describing someone trying to cave your head in with a deadly weapon. Angus throws a massive temper tantrum and yells that he will never apologise, and on that deranged note, we end the first scene proper. It's impossible to overstate how bizarre this scene feels, but the following scene is, if anything, more strange. We're in Temra Castle, and the evil Queen Maeve is being disappointed by a woman doing a folk dance with a tambourine. She describes this as dreadful, and it really is, and demands a new entertainer. Things are about to get even worse though, as the folk dancer is replaced by a crusty juggler. He's a proper crusty juggler as well, complete with white guy dreadlocks and the vacant grin I associate with all practitioners of circus skills. This too finds no favour, and lastly, a man in stilts appears to do his best walking about with quite long legs routine. An act that may possibly be the only thing in this world less entertaining than ventriloquism. "Your legs are too long," yells Maeve, and pokes him with a sword. This is at once an accurate summation of stilt walking and a completely insane thing to say to a stilt walker. Fortunately, General Talk is on hand to bring this very odd scene back to some kind of business in hand. Talk explains the premise of the show, just in case you've forgotten in the 3 minutes since the voiceover at the top of the show also did that. He tells Queen Maeve that Angus must not be allowed to claim his magical armour, and Queen Maeve comes up with a cunning plan. She's going to kidnap Angus and subject him to the entertainment she has just witnessed, which should, she says, take the fight out of him. This is basically a variation on the same plan she's had since episode 2, but I will say it makes fractionally more sense than the scheme in the last episode, where she cunningly lured Ivar to the exact place he was trying to get to. Talk promptly dispatches a squad of Temra soldiers, who ambush some soldiers of Kel's and nick their clothes, in order to sneak into the castle and take Angus prisoner. Meanwhile, Cahad has finally extracted an extremely grudging apology from Angus and returned him to his normal size. Again, he tries to give Angus advice about being honest with himself, and again, Angus reacts with unfathomable levels of hostility. He's honestly reminding me of Donald Trump in this episode. He's got that same brittle shell of blustering arrogance over a bottomless void of insecurity. I still think Angus would make a better US president, though you could say the same thing about that cabbage that outlasted Liz Truss as Prime Minister. Cahad gives Angus a stone that will help him find the cave where the Rock Wolf of Temra awaits him, and Angus responds with further hostility and storms out. This opening 5 minutes of the episode really showcased that combination of the comfortingly familiar and the absolutely insane. While I correctly predicted that Maeve's plan would involve separating Angus from the rest of the Mystic Knights, nothing could have prepared me for just what a terrible human being Angus is in this episode. Nor would I have predicted that Maeve would spend several minutes offering scathing reviews of low-quality traditional entertainments. Hey-ho. We now cut to the Mystic Knights practicing sword fighting. This is sensible, in that they are trying to ensure they're ready for the latest part of the quest, but also quite weird because neither Angus, Deirdre nor Ivar actually uses a sword in battle. It's like getting ready for a darts tournament by playing snooker. Angus asks the others if they were afraid when they fought for their armour, and Rowan tells him that fear is the companion of all who do great deeds, which might actually be the first aphorism we've had in the entire series that makes some kind of sense. Ivar adds that while this is true, fear is never their master, and knocks Angus over, winning their practice duel. Angus responds by throwing another massive sulk and storming off yet again. He then breaks into Cahad's chamber and tries to steal a magic powder to make him brave, but finds the jar has an insulting note from Cahad saying that he always knew Angus was a thief. Angus has yet another temper tantrum, but is faintly intrigued to find some laughing powder among the druid's accoutrements. At this point, it's clear that Angus's frankly disturbing mood changes are intended to be an indication that he's trying to cover for the fact that he's terrified of the Rock Wolf of Temra. The problem is that someone being an absolute arsehole for understandable reasons is still someone being an arsehole, and in general, arseholes are not especially pleasant to spend time with. I think this is the sort of thing that should probably be related to the B-plot in a TV episode. Something that can be happening in the background to a supporting character rather than something that's the main focus. Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog thinks B-plots are a sign of weakness and doesn't really have any truck with them. I suppose a character being oppressed by their own imagined failings is a little more interesting than Ivar just really wanting a cup, but at least Ivar wasn't a whiny bitch about it. Deirdre, Ivar and Rowan are still practicing their sword fighting when the disguised warriors of Temra rock up to ask rudely where Angus is. Rowan takes their leader to task for not showing the proper respect to a princess of Kells, which is a nice bit of business. Still, no one spots that the scruffy-looking warriors they've never seen before are interlopers, which is classic the hired help all look the same to me entitlement. Chastened, the pretend warriors bow, and Ivar helpfully directs them to where Angus is. I wonder what they want with Angus, muses Ivar. Yes, what indeed. The four rogues find Angus in Cahad's chamber where he's giggling to himself like an idiot, presumably having taken some laughing powder in an attempt to get high. He points and laughs at them, and they surround him, and the screen fades to black, so the show doesn't have to explain how the warriors of Temra are going to get out of the castle unchallenged with a loudly guffawing man in a sack. I do quite like it, honestly, when shows completely ignore glaring plot holes. We've been watching Smallville recently, and characters in that show are amazing at suddenly showing up in each other's house without explanation, often at weirdly fraught moments. And it's never explained. The handful of core sets are treated as being spatially contiguous, and there's no clear separation between public and private space. Anyone can show up anywhere at any hour of the day or night without prior warning, and the show simply demands that you accept this as a normal way for people to behave, even though it's clearly deeply, deeply odd. Instead of showing Angus being kidnapped, we immediately cut to the aftermath, with Deirdre, Ivar and Rowan looking for him with increasing concern. Deirdre describes him as a handsome fool, which is the nicest thing anyone's said about him this entire episode. Rowan then says Angus will make them proud, which is actually nice and way more than the petulant git deserves based on his current behaviour. In Cahad's chamber, they find evidence of a disturbance, including Angus's abandoned ball and chain. And then Cahad shows up with the warriors of Kells who were mugged in the forest. They explain that the Temra ruffians nicked their tunics, and Ivar cleverly works out that the soldiers looking for Angus were imposters, and Cahad finds the time to berate Angus for rummaging through his stuff. We then cut to Angus in the dungeon, where, as promised, Maeve is making him watch a crusty juggler. She truly is a depraved fiend of a woman. She does also find the time to describe Angus as handsome as well, which is starting to feel like a peace offering to an actor who the script is treating really quite badly at this point. Sure, we're making you look like a colossal tool all of the time, but we're going to make sure both regular female characters are positively frothing over with suppressed sexual desire. Back at the Castle of Kells, Rowan and Deirdre are arguing for a frontal assault on the Castle of Temra to rescue Angus. King Conovar needs to refuse for the plot to work, so refuse he does, even though previous episodes have made it clear that the kingdom is doomed if Angus can't claim his magical armour. One of the guards suggests that a daring commando raid by a few brave souls might just work, and Cahad reveals he's heard a rumour that Queen Maeve is currently fed up with the quality of her entertainers. On that note, we cut immediately to Castle Temra, where General Torque announces that he's found some entertainers just hanging around outside the castle, wearing hooded cloaks and masks that conceal their faces. He's done the obvious thing and brought them inside to replace the crusty juggler and his equally obnoxious colleagues. He dismisses the entertainers and they shuffle off with their faces downcast in a way that actually made me laugh out loud. It's a lot like the running gag in Arrested Development where the characters would do an exaggerated sad walk off screen when things went badly for them. It's just a really charming moment in an episode which has been quite low on charming moments. The whole business with Maeve and her subpar entertainers has been the absolute high point of the episode so far, and absolutely not what I would have expected going in. And that is one of those nice little surprises that the show sometimes throws up. Deirdre and Rowan do a terrible song while Ivar tries his hand at the only thing worse than circus skills and ventriloquism, close-up magic. "Is this some kind of trick?" asks Torque as he selects his card, which is a genuinely brilliant line, which is followed up by an even better line as he says, "Oh, I've selected to dunce. Is that unlucky?" It's marvellous. This is a signal for the Mystic Knights to throw off their disguise and take the bumbling general by surprise. Guards are summoned and a bijou little fracas develops that sees Rowan use his fire sword to blast open the gate of Angus's cell, allowing him to join the ongoing ruckus. Maeve then pops up to do the thing she always does, which is to use her staff to summon an underwhelming monster. There are basically two types of monsters in Mystic Knights so far. The ones that look quite good and move like shit, and the ones that look like shit but move quite well. This is the second sort. Maeve calls it the Bull of Temra, and it's supposed to be a minotaur, but somehow it looks more like a sheep than a bull. It stomps around a bit and then shoots laser beams from a second pair of horns that the designers have given it for some reason. If there's one thing that the producers of Mystic Knights love, it's monsters that stand still and shoot magical lasers. It's an ideal way to establish threat without the need to work out how to choreograph elaborate fight scenes against thin air. The Bull of Temra can do a tiny bit more than some of the monsters. When it charges, I hope you can hear the air quotes around charges, there is the very vaguest sense of alacrity in the animation. It's not much beyond the slow stumble favoured by most of Maeve's creations, but it is technically moving with something that's a third cousin twice removed to urgency. Angus wants to stay and help with the fight against the Bull of Temra, but Rowan points out that they really need him to go away and come back with his magical armour. Angus takes a powder, leaving the rest of the knights to face the beast. It's precisely at this point that Rowan says, "Only our magical armour can help us now," and we get the ensemble transformation scene as he, Ivar and Deirdre put on their best plastic togs. Of course, the armour is going to be no help at all because the format demands that only Angus and his armour can give them the strength to defeat the monster. This has the odd effect of making it so that Rowan, Ivar and Deirdre in their magical armour are less good at fighting than Rowan was on his own in episode 3. They summon their armour and the bull promptly starts beating them like they owe it money. At this point, Maeve and General Torque decide that they will leave the Mystic Knights to their fate, which is very strange because Maeve has just said that this is some proper entertainment at last. It's like leaving the best gig you've ever been to early to beat the traffic. Still, Angus can now finally face the Rock Wolf of Temra, and the show has set a high bar for disappointing confrontations between the leads and the sentinels guarding the various pieces of armour. From appallingly clumsy sword fights to just standing opposite each other, there's been some sterling work done in the arena of underwhelming action set pieces. So imagine my delight when Angus bellows his challenge at the mouth of the cave and a man in the most substandard sentinel costume so far just sort of shambles out, looking like he's in imminent danger of falling over. Trivia fans may like to know that this is yet another villain being portrayed by Ned Dennehy, and he's got the silliest sounding throat condition so far. The Rock Wolf describes having to face a thief as an insult, but really this whole scene is an insult to everyone watching. It's a frankly glorious moment of bathos as the Rock Wolf tells Angus to go away and then awkwardly shambles back into his cave. Angus gives him another good yelling at, and the Rock Wolf re-emerges with all the gravitas and menace of a hungover man who doesn't want to mow the lawn, but there's rain forecast later, and if he doesn't get it done today, it'll be bugging him all week, so he might as well push through it. The Rock Wolf shoots some lasers out of his eyes, because of course he does, and that sends Angus tumbling down the side of the mountain. Kudos to the production team for finding something even less impressive than a man in a stupid costume just standing there firing lasers by having the man look as though he doesn't even want to be standing there. We then cut back briefly to the Bull of Temra shooting laser beams out of its horns at the other knights, and honestly, it feels like the editors are going out of their way to show how few ideas there are for action sequences in this episode. It literally cuts from boring lasers to different but equally boring lasers. Unfortunately, things are about to pick up, because when we return to Angus, it's clear that the episode has come in too short and the writer's solution is pleasantly baffling. As Angus shelters behind a rock, an elf materialises apropos of nothing and offers him some decidedly non-magical armour if he will abandon his fight with the Rockwolf. It's not clear who this elf is, where she comes from, or what her agenda is, but when Angus refuses, she just vanishes completely from both the scene and indeed the episode. Angus gives himself a little pep talk about finding the strength within himself and runs up the slope to engage the Rockwolf in a low-quality battle. The Rockwolf swings at him a couple of times and Angus ducks despite the swings being a clear metre away from actually making contact. It's like two boxers fighting in different postcodes. Angus then bashes the monster on the foot with his ball and chain, which is mildly amusing, as Ned Dennehy gets to do some of his finest stubbed toe acting. It's hard to describe what follows in a way that captures the sheer artlessness of the execution. Angus uses the distraction to hide behind a rock and dangles his ball and chain from one side of the rock. The Rockwolf, on seeing the ball and chain, assumes that this is where Angus must be. He rushes round the rock and is surprised to find Angus is absent. Angus, having crept up behind the Rockwolf via the other direction, taps him on the shoulder, and then, when the Rockwolf turns around, grabs his ball and chain from the rock, winds up a really big swing, and smacks the Rockwolf so hard in the arse that he goes flying through the air back into his cave. It unfolds with all the dynamism of your elderly nan making a cup of tea. Everything takes far, far, far too long. Ned Dennehy moves with the alacrity of a depressed sloth, and Vincent Walsh isn't much better. It's the textbook example of something that probably seemed fine on the page, but without extensive rehearsals and really tight editing, was never going to be staged in a way that could possibly land. Anyway, Angus has defeated the Rockwolf, and that means that there's only one thing left to do, which is summoning his armour. He says the magic words and the result is less impressive than everyone else's. It is by far the most anonymous set of armour, which is a real shame. It's just sort of grey and drab, the armour equivalent of slough. You know how the rest of the episode pans out by now, and I'm not going to dwell on it as I've already written nearly 4,000 words about a 20-minute show. Angus pops up in Temra Castle and does a bullfighter routine with the Minotaur that I could probably write another 4 or 5 paragraphs about. With the Bull of Temra stunned after it runs into a wall, the knights combine their weapons in a way they absolutely could have done earlier and defeat the creature. Maeve pops up and, for wildly unclear reasons, teleports all 4 knights back to Kel's castle. What's more intimidating than giving someone a lift home? I think the writers must have been dimly aware of this because she projects an image of herself to deliver a threatening monologue after they get back, which includes a weirdly sapphic moment where she tells Deirdre she'll be watching her sleep. We get a short outro where Angus resolutely proves that he's learned nothing, which was at least charming, and then delivers a final one-liner that makes no sense at all. Cahad wearily asks if they will ever be free of Angus's rudeness, and he retorts, "No, your crudeness," and chuckles like he's delivered a punchline worthy of Oscar Wilde, whereas in reality what he said would be considered weak material in a junior school playground. Cahad punishes him with laughing powder, and we end the show. It's very much a game of two halves. The opening is maddening, and Angus being a psychopath again is an unwelcome turn of events, but things do pick up once we get into the meat of the episode proper. I really enjoyed the business with the incompetent entertainers. It was a wonderful little bit, and the fight between Angus and the Rockwolf was conceptually more interesting than any of the others, even though it was somehow even less competently staged. I feel like we've got a lot to look forward to in the next episode, when I assume that the knights will seek to tame the dragon. I'm very much looking forward to that, and I hope you'll join me then for another unnecessarily in-depth discussion of a children's TV show. If you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at hjdoomretrofun, all one word, at gmail.com, or by following me on Blue Sky at hjdoom. Thank you very much for listening. Take care, and I'll see you soon.